Hi everybody, we just got done talking about symbols and what symbols are. Now we're going to talk just briefly about what language is. Language is defined as a system of symbols that allows people to communicate with one another. We use symbols in very complex ways. Now when we first started using symbols as a species, it allowed us to communicate in ways that probably gave us an evolutionary advantage. For example, we made maybe noises that kind of meant certain things to one another, and kind of maybe had a very rudimentary yet fairly complex way of talking. So if you and I were out hunting, trying to kill a wild boar or something like that, or some kind of animal, we might for example decide that I want to communicate to you that you should go around to kind of go around where the animal is and chase it my way so that I can kill it. And that gave us an evolutionary advantage over a lot of other species. So maybe a lot of that, the ability to use symbols and the ability to use language is what allowed us to still be here. So language is not something that's natural. It is, our brains are in fact hardwired for the acquisition of language, meaning that our brains have a structure that allowed us to develop language. In the same way that, say, my computer has a physical nature to it. It's got hardware, right? It's got a motherboard with a processor chip and RAM and a video card and a hard drive. But just because it's got those physical things does not mean that I'm necessarily going to be able to surf the web with it. So what that requires is software, right? Software, it has to be downloaded. It has to be put on the computer, and that allows it to be able to do more things. So our operating system, for example, whatever operating system that is, I use Windows 10. But regardless, that software is similar to the fact that we have all this knowledge. The knowledge that we acquire is not automatic. And we'll talk about that later on too, but it's an important idea that we learn language through cultural transmission. We learn it through socialization. Cultural transmission is the process by which one generation passes culture to the next. We don't automatically have culture. We learn culture. We teach it to our children, and if we don't teach it to our children, if we don't teach them the symbols, then they end up not learning them. Luckily for us, our brains are when we're little are like sponges, and so we're able to acquire language, and we do it really relatively efficiently. My 2-year-old granddaughter is amazing to watch. How quickly she can soak up information in her environment and learn the symbols that are associated with certain things, like what words mean. And it's very cool to watch. From someone who watches people, I love to see this as it unfolds. It's very cool. Now, in the section on language, one of the things that they talk about is what's called the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis, or Sapir-Whorf thesis, as it's sometimes referred to. Sapir and Whorf were researchers; they were theorists, and it's just their last names. But their basic idea of what they were saying is that people perceive the world through the cultural lens of language. What does that mean? It means that the language that we use, the series of noises that we make associated with specific things, colors our view of the world, right? In other words, we don't directly interact with the objective world. We interpret it, and we interpret it through partially through our language. We think in our language. You know how you have that internal monologue, right? That internal voice that obviously you talk. When you do that, you speak in your own language, the language that you grew, the culture that you grew up in. So if you grew up in America, chances are that language was English. However, it might be for many people out there, it could be English and Spanish. For other people, it could be English and Mandarin Chinese. So, but whatever that is, it's going to affect the way you see the world, right? That the language that you use, the symbols that you use, are going to affect how you see the world. They're going to color. It's like wearing different colored sunglasses, if you will. What color lenses are in those sunglasses are going to affect what you're going to see and how you're going to perceive the world. So the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis, or Sapir-Whorf thesis, as it's often referred, is that that people tend to perceive the world through the cultural lens of their language. So hopefully that makes a little bit more sense now. The book doesn't quite explain it all that well, I don't think. Another thing about language is that language just doesn't just involve verbal language, right? Noises that we make, like I'm making now, that you understand because you understand what those noises mean symbolically. And we also have what we call nonverbal language, or gestures. Gestures mean things too. But it's also important, like all the other aspects of symbols and language, that our gestures are culturally specific. They're not universal, not automatically. Now, some cultures can share the same gesture, symbolic meaning. So, for example, flipping somebody the middle finger can get your ass kicked in quite a few countries, right, or quite a few cultures around the world. But that doesn't mean that you could probably very easily find places around the world where you flip somebody off and they don't understand what the heck you even mean. And probably the only real reason why it's the flipping people the middle finger that people might know what that means is really just the fact that we have exported so much culture to around the world through our media. Hollywood, right? Hollywood movies. And so those kind of gestures get used in those movies, and then other people in other countries see it. They get used to our gestures because we're in many ways quite dominant in the media world. In the same way that English is spoken all over the world, often as a second language. Given that, the idea of gestures, can be shared. But in many, many cases, they're not. In fact, sometimes gestures are very specific to different cultures. So, for example, if you do this in our culture, it means okay. But for example, in France, this means you're a zero, you're nothing. We do this. This means, thumbs up, good job, right? That kind of thing. But in Australia, this means up yours. That's a problem. That'll get your butt kicked. And so symbols can have very different meaning. If, for example, in our culture, if we were in the hallway and I see you across a crowded hallway and I do this, that means come here, right? But if I was, in many Asian cultures, if I was part of that culture, I might do this. And this means come here. Now, if you did that to us here in America and you weren't aware of all these other cultures, you wouldn't know what that means. You might think that this is saying hi, when in fact it's actually saying come here. So gestures, like symbols and language, are culturally specific and culturally created. All right? So that is the end of this one. I am going to continue on in the next one then. All right.